Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn Taisus Dibur HaMaschil V'holcha v'nocha b'chor kolshehu banul l'machlekes Rabbi Meir v'Rabbanan. Let's begin. V'holcha v'nocha b'chor kolshehu banul l'machlekes Rabbi Meir v'Rabbanan. In the Gemara, we had a question that Rava asked Abaya. Why, according to Abaya, that says that a chay Rosh Hashanah, a hole in the wall of Rosh Hashanah, is considered a Rosh Hashanah? Why don't we explain the mission that says if a person threw an item at a wall, and when he's in Rosh Hashanah from a distance of 4 amas, he's chayav? Why don't we explain that it landed in a hole in the wall? According to Abaya, he'll be chayav for throwing 4 amas in Rosh Hashanah, since a hole in the wall of a Rosh Hashanah is considered a Rosh Hashanah. Abaya answered, one of the answers Abaya gave was that if that's the case, then the person would also be chayav when he threw it higher than 10 tefachim. And the Mishnah says that he's pater higher than 10 tefachim. And the reason he would be chayav is because if it landed in a wall higher than 10 tefachim, it went from a Rosh Hashanah to a Rosh Hashanah. Since the hole that's higher than 10 tefachim is 10 tefachim high, and it's also 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. And the Gemara continues and explains that not only if it's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide would he be chayav, even if it's not 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, he would be chayav. Since the Mishnah is a stam Mishnah that follows Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Meir says, we carve out an area to complete it so that it should have the required dimensions that are needed for that case. So Rabbi Meir would say that whether it's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide and it's a Rosh Hashanah, or whether it's not 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, he'll still be chayiv, because in the second case where it's not 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, we're going to say chaykikin lahashlam to view it as being 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. So this tesis consists of a question and an answer. Then there's a side discussion of 3 points, and to that there's one more side discussion. So let's see tesis inside it. It's a wonder to the Ri. The Beperakama, the Erevin, from the first parak of Erevin, Bekipa, by a rounded doorway, the Pligi bar Rabbi Meir v'Rabbanan, and that where Rabbi Meir and Rabbanan argue. They argue about the chiyuv of a mezuzah for a doorway that's rounded, so it comes out that it's 10 tefachim high. However, it's not 4 tefachim wide all the way to the top. Rather, it rounds out. Only the bottom is 4 tefachim wide. We say Amrinan Hasam. We say over there the Lay Amrinan Chaykikin Lahashim LeRav Meir. That Ella, we only say Chaykikin Lahashim according to Rav Meir, Beyesh B'Raglei Gimel Ugvaya Yud, when there's by its feet 3 tefachim and it's 10 tefachim high. What does that mean? 10 tefachim high, we understand that the height of the door is 10 tefachim. What's Beyesh B'Raglei Gimel? So it says Taisus Pirush, meaning Gavaya Gimel tefachim Sheyesh Ben Rachav Dal, the height of 3 tefachim where there's a width of 4 tefachim. So only in a case where the doorway has the height of 10 tefachim, and in addition, on the bottom 3 tefachim, it is 4 tefachim wide, and then afterwards it rounds, do Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan argue. Rabbanan say it's pater from a mezuzah, since it's not 4 tefachim wide all the way to the top, for all 10 tefachim, and Rabbi Meir says, Chaykikin lahashlim, we view it as if it is 4 tefachim wide all the way to the top. But if there isn't by its legs 3 tefachim, or if it's not 10 tefachim high, we don't say it. Rabbi Meir is not going to say Chaykikin lahashlim by a tiny doorway that's 1 tefach wide by 1 tefach high. It's only if there's the 10 tefachim of height, and in addition there's a width of 4 tefachim by the first 3 tefachim, then Rabbi Meir will say Chaykikin lahashlim. And that being the case, we have a question over here. V'im kain, and if so, heichi amrinan hacha, how do we say over here Chaykikin lahashlim l'Rabbi Meir, that we're going to say Chaykikin lahashlim according to Rabbi Meir, b'char kolshu, by a small hole. B'char kolshu is referring to a hole of the smallest possible dimensions. In such a case, Rabbi Meir is not going to say Chaykikin lahashlim. Rabbi Meir only says Chaykikin lahashlim when the basic structure is in place. It's just missing a certain part that's needed. But the basic structure of 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim wide is there. However, in our case, where there's no dimensions to it whatsoever, it's a chor kolshu, Rabbi Meir is not going to say Chaykikin lahashlim. And Taisus answers, Va'emer Ri, and Ri says, Da'ayri b'chayrin shedarkin la'seis b'shas ha'binyan, that we're talking about holes that they would make, that was common to make at the time of building, Shemu Fulashim Rosh Hashanah, that were open to the Rosh Hashanah. We're not referring to what it sounds like in our Gemara, a hole in the Rosh Hashanah side of a wall, but rather referring to holes that were commonly made in the walls that went through from the Rosh Hashanah to the Rosh Hashanah. Uvitzad Rosh Hashanah heim rechavim dalid of a loy mitzad Rosh Hashanah, and on the side of the Rosh Hashanah they are 4 tefachim wide. So on the Rosh Hashanah side, there were 4 tefachim wide, but not on the Rosh Hashanah side, because they closed off to the smallest possible opening. So this is basically the answer of Taisus, which is, we asked, Rabbi Meir is not going to say Chaykikin lahashlim unless the basic structure is in place, and the answer is, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a hole that has the basic structure in place, because it's a hole that was made, that these are referring to holes that were commonly made when building walls, and at the side of the Rosh Hashanah they had 4 tefachim, and the side of Rosh Hashanah they narrow down. So the basic structure is in place in the Rishus HaYachid. It has 4 tefachim. So Rav Meir is going to say Chaykikin lahashlim, so that now it has 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim in width. So this is the answer of Tosfos. And here we really cover the question and answer. From here on, there's going to be a complete answer, a proof to it, and then the side discussions, 2 side discussions. But here's the question and the answer. Rav Meir wouldn't say Chaykikin lahashlim, and the answer is you're right, but we're not referring to a chor kolshehu, we're referring to a hole that's kolshehu on the side of Rishus HaRabim. And now Tosfos completes the answer. According to everybody, this is a chor Rishus HaYachid when it's higher than 10 tefachim. Everybody's going to agree with that. So the way we learned it in the Gemara, we viewed it as a hole higher than 10 tefachim over the Rishus HaRabim. It was just a hole in the wall. It wasn't necessarily a chor Rishus HaYachid. Now it comes out that everybody agrees it's a chor Rishus HaYachid. It's a hole of the Rishus HaYachid. The chor Rishus HaYachid, Rishus HaYachid dummy, that which is a chor Rishus HaYachid, and everybody agrees it's a Rishus HaYachid. V'lai pligi ella, and they're only arguing l'shav yamokim dalad al dalad. The question is it 4 by 4, and now the anacha is in a proper area, or is it not 4 by 4 and the anacha is not in a proper area? So when it comes to throwing into such a hole higher than 10 tefachim, everybody's in agreement that it's a chor Rishus HaYachid. The question and the difference between Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan will be whether it has this area of 4 by 4 tefachim, so the anacha is a good anacha, and the person will be chayiv for carrying into the Rishus HaYachid, or whether it's not 4 by 4 tefachim, and therefore, although he carried into the Rishus HaYachid, there's no proper anacha, and he's not going to be chayiv. That according to Rabbi Meir, we say chaykikin lahashlim, and it's like it's 4 by 4 tefachim, so we have a proper anacha in the Rishus HaYachid, and he will be chayiv. And that's how we know it didn't fall into a wall, because it says that higher than 10 tefachim, he's pater. Of a mamish b'chor kolshehu, but if it's actually a real chor kolshehu, the tiniest of holes, but an actual small hole, afilu Rav Meir made the delay amrinan chaykikin lahashlim. Even Rav Meir agrees that we don't say chaykikin lahashlim. And Tosfos brings a proof to this. V'chein mashma b'Yerushalmi, and it also seems so. It's also indicated in the Yerushalmi the garsinan hasam that we say over there. Al da'ayit de Rav Meir, on the opinion of Rav Meir, bein sheyesham dalet, whether there is 4 tefachim there, bein she'ein sham daled, when whether there isn't 4 tefachim there, royin is a kaisel kagamim, we see the wall as being hollow. And the Maharsha explains how we see a proof over there, but the point that he brings out is that it's only when there's a basic parameters in place, then we say chaykikin lahashlim. If it's lacking, we don't. The Maharsha once again explains the proof in the Yerushalmi. What we're bringing out over here is that he brings a supportive proof to this, that the basic structure needs to be in place of the 10 tefachim by the mezuzah and the 4 tefachim at the end to say chaykikin lahashlim. The same is true for the hole in the wall. And now Tosfos is going to bring out 3 different questions that come up from this answer. He's going to address them. The first question is that we're saying that it goes all the way through to the Rishus HaYachid, and higher than 10 tefachim it's considered a chayri Rishus HaYachid. So lower than 10 tefachim, it's also referring to the same type of hole that goes to the Rishus HaYachid. So it should be chayri Rishus HaYachid. And in the Gemara we're speaking about it as if it's chayri Rishus HaRabim. That was Rava's question to Abaye. You hold it's a chayri Rishus HaRabim. According to this type of hole should be classified as a chayri Rishus HaYachid. So Tosfos explains, and specifically those that are higher than 10 tefachim, that are going through the wall, are considered chayri Rishus HaYachid. But that of lower than 10 tefachim, the people of Rishus HaYachid don't use them. Because of the people of Rishus HaRabim that use them. So it comes out that if there's such a hole that goes all the way through and it's higher than 10 tefachim, the people in the public can't use it comfortably. They don't use it. The people in Rishus HaYachid will use it, and therefore it's considered a chayri Rishus HaYachid. However, lower than 10 tefachim, there the public is able to use it to some degree, and therefore they will use it, and as a result, the people in the Rishus HaYachid won't use it, and it's therefore considered chayri Rishus HaRabim. So Tosfos answers that question. Now another question that needs to be answered is, we said, and if you say that this hole higher than 10 tefachim is not 4 by 4, and therefore the person, what was the therefore that we wanted to say? Therefore the person is not chayiv, and that's why the Mishnah says it's as if he threw it in the ear. According to what we're saying now, it's not throwing in the ear. It's throwing into Rishus HaYachid. This is a Rishus HaYachid. Even if we don't say chaykikin lahashlim, it's considered a Rishus HaYachid, says Tosfos. And this is the explanation of the Gemara. And if you say that it doesn't have 4 by 4 tefachim in the hole, and even though they're chayri Rishus HaYachid, it's like throwing in the ear, because it didn't land on an area that's 4 by 4 tefachim. There's no difference between throwing something in the ear or throwing it into a rishus when it didn't land on an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. It's not a proper anacha. The person won't be chayiv. And that's what he says. And if you're going to tell me He's just reading it into the words. And if you tell me it doesn't have the area of 4 tefachim, and therefore it's like he threw it in the ear. But Rabbi Yehuda said that Rabbi Meir is going to say chaykikin lahashlim, and it's not like throwing in the ear; it's like throwing in Rosh Hashanah, and he would be chayiv. And now Tosfos addresses another important question, which is we explained that our Gemara is referring to a hole that goes through the wall. The question that now could be asked: why don't we establish the Mishnah according to Abaye by a hole that doesn't go through the wall? He threw it into a hole of the Rosh Hashanah. And lower than 10 tefachim is chayiv because it's considered a Rosh Hashanah, and he threw Dalad Amos and Rosh Hashanah according to Abaye. And higher than 10 tefachim, he's going to be patur because it doesn't have enough dimensions to say chaykikin lahashlim according to this. So why didn't we interpret the Mishnah in such a way that higher than 10 tefachim is kazerik ba'aver, even according to Rabbi Meir, because we don't say chaykikin lahashlim by achor kolshu. So it says Tosfos v'hadalei mukminin masnisin b'chor kolshu mamish. And this that we don't establish our Mishnah by an actual small hole that doesn't go through and through. The that we don't say chaykikin according to everybody, so it would make sense why higher than 10 tefachim is patur and lower than 10 tefachim he'll be chayiv. Says Tosfos 2 answers. This is because regular holes are like this. Our question was why say it's talking about a fig that's stuck to the wall. It's better to talk about that it went into a hole in the wall. It's only better if it's more common. The more common holes are the ones that go all the way through. A regular hole in the wall is not so common, so it's not a better answer. So it says Tosfos, it wasn't common to have such holes, so we might as well talk about the fig that's stuck to the wall. And furthermore, another reason why we don't talk about such holes, we must establish it by a fatty fig. Why? The bechor kol shehu mamish, the le'amar bechaykikin lahashlim, because by an actual hole that we don't say chaykikin lahashlim, lekalokmi, we can't establish it. We can't say that higher than 10 tefachim, it went into a hole that's less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, and that's why he's patur. Why? The im kain, because if so, lamata miyud amai kazerik baritz, when it's lower than 10 tefachim, why is it like he's throwing it on the ground? We said if it went to the wall lower than 10 tefachim, it's if he threw it on the ground and he's chayiv. Why is it like throwing on the ground and he's chayiv? If the hole higher than 10 tefachim is not 4 by 4, the hole lower than 10 tefachim is not either 4 by 4. So there's no proper hanacha. There's no hanacha on an area that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. So Tosfos gives a second explanation that this is going to be resolved easily on its own, that we can't be talking about a regular small hole, because if lower than 10 tefachim it is 4 by 4, then above 10 tefachim it's also 4 by 4, and he'll be chayiv above, and he's not. And if above 10 tefachim it's not 4 by 4, that means lower than 10 tefachim it wasn't either 4 by 4, and then he would be patur. And it says in the Mishnah he's chayiv. So by a regular hole that doesn't go through, it's not even a question, says Tosfos, because it won't fit with the Mishnah. And based on this that Tosfos just presented over here, that we have an association between the hole higher than 10 tefachim and the one lower than 10 tefachim, and whatever we apply to the one higher, we need to apply to the one that's lower, and the reverse as well. Tosfos now goes to a side point, and that is as follows. Rashi, we don't have to say anymore like what Rashi explains, the parach mikoyach the stam masnisim Rav Meir here, that he asks from this that a stam Mishnah is Rav Meir. The way we understood it is Rav Meir says chaykikin lahashlim. Who said our Mishnah follows Rabbi Meir? Because it's a stam Mishnah, and a stam Mishnah is Rav Meir. It says Tosfos, now we don't have to say that anymore. Rather, it must be that if it's talking about a small hole, that's not 4 by 4, we have to establish that the Mishnah follows Rav Meir that says we don't, not because stam Mishnah Rav Meir, but just by reading the Mishnah itself, we are going to see that it follows Rav Meir. So we don't have to use an external idea or rule that stam Mishnah Rav Meir. Just by looking at the Mishnah itself, we could determine that it follows Rav Meir. Why? If we're talking about the hole that we explained that goes all the way through, why when it throws lower than 10 tefachim was the person chayiv? It landed in an area that's not 4 by 4. It must be because we say chaykikin lahashlim. So also above 10 tefachim we need to say chaykikin lahashlim. In other words, what Tosfos is saying is that if the hole lower than 10 tefachim is not dalad al dalad, he won't be chayiv there either. If we say we turn it into dalad al dalad because chaykikin lahashlim, then we see that the Mishnah holds of chaykikin lahashlim. So in the Mishnah itself we could see that if it's referring to a hole that's 4 by 4, both below 10 tefachim and above 10 tefachim, he should be chayiv above. If it's referring to a hole that's not 4 by 4, so then why is he chayiv below? Because we say chaykikin lahashlim. So then also above we need to say chaykikin lahashlim. So we can actually look at the Mishnah itself and determine that if it's less than 4 by 4 tefachim, the Mishnah clearly holds of Rav Meir. So therefore Tosfos says we don't need any more this explanation of Rashi that stam Mishnah Rav Meir. We could actually get it from within the Mishnah itself, which is much more straightforward. And Tosfos concludes, V'yesh liyashav pirish Rashi, and we can answer Rashi, the hutzruch lefarish mishum the stam masnisim Rav Meir kaparich, that he needed to explain that he's asking from this that a stam mishnah is Rav Meir. We could understand. Taisus is now going to explain why Rashi said that it's based on stam mishnah Rav Meir and not from the mishnah itself. The ilav hochi avalela michfrif behedja, because if not so, if it wasn't based on stam mishnah Rav Meir, he should have asked directly. We shouldn't have even brought up Rav Meir. If we're going to bring it from within the Mishnah itself, then we should have just said, if you tell me that above 10 tefachim is pater, because it's not 4 by 4, then why is he chayav below 10 tefachim? It's not either 4 by 4. And if you tell me that we view it as being 4 by 4, because chaykikin lahashlam, then also above. Why did the Gemara even bring down Rav Meir? Now Taisus is not answering why the Gemara brought down Rav Meir, but he's pointing out from the fact that the Gemara did bring down Rav Meir indicates that it's based on that machlekes between Rav Meir and the Rabbanan, and not from within the Mishnah itself. For whatever reason, the Gemara doesn't bring it from within the Mishnah itself. It brings it by presenting the argument between Rav Meir and the Rabbanan. So that seems to indicate that the Gemara is relying on that this is what Rav Meir says and Stam Mishnah Rabbi Meir. So to summarize Taisus, really it boils down to a question on what the Gemara says here. Now we're going to say Chaykikin Lahashlam according to Rav Meir, and in this case that's not true. And Taisus, as a result, says that we're not talking about those holes that are just small holes. We're talking about holes that go all the way through the wall. And in those holes, Rabbi Meir will say Chaykikin Lahashlam, because on the other end, in Rosh Hashanah, they are 4 tefachim wide. And then we went into 3 side discussions, and one of those led to another side discussion. We just want to point out over here is that the reason why the Gemara did not, one of the important parts of Tosfos, did not talk about that other really small hole is because it's just not common. Number one, and number two, if it's a really small hole, he would never be chayiv. So it comes out that the Gemara didn't even think of processing the din by a small hole because there's no reason to even address it. Now, for 2 reasons. Number one, it's not common to happen. It's not a regular thing, and therefore we might as well talk about a fatty fig. And number 2, it would make no sense that it's such a small hole because then he wouldn't be chayiv when it's lower than 10 tefachim, and therefore it wasn't even a thought that that's the hole that we're referring to.